Hi everyone, McBeard here, back with a very exciting video for you because I have a new card reveal for Gwent. I'm going to get this started nice and fast for you because I do have to leave for a flight very soon to get to Gwent Slam. So let's get this started here. Here you go. Here's your card art. It is a neutral bronze special card called Crow's Eye. So what does Crow's Eye do, you might ask? So Crow's Eye damages the highest enemy on each row by 4. Increase the damage dealt by 1 for each copy of this card in your graveyard to a maximum of 10 damage. Assuming that you would ever get 6 copies in your graveyard to do a maximum of 30 damage, that would be a feat in itself. So there is one piece of information that I do not have about this card, and eventually, I'm sure this will be revealed by Paul Berja, who was kind enough to give me this opportunity. As I just mentioned that we were wanting to do community card reveals yesterday on the podcast that I released, Commander's Horn Podcast, episode 57, talking about releasing community cards. So there is one piece of information that I do not have about this card, and that is what kind of special card is it? I suspect that it's an organic card since it is depicting an animal, and it is called Crow's Eye. Cards like Lacerate, Adrenaline Rush, Martyrdom, and Blood Curdling Roar are your other organic cards, and they do share similar qualities to this card, but we don't know for sure. So that actually makes it, the evaluation of the card is different based on what it is. But bare bones, fundamentally, you play this card once in a situation where you get full value for the card, 12 damage the first time you play it, 15 damage the second time you play it, 18 damage the third time you play it. But then it gets tricky. Getting additional copies of this card in your graveyard would involve your opponent playing it and you having an ability to steal the card from the graveyard, such as Archgriffin or Donar and Hindar. As well as if it is actually a spell, this would mean that Ithleen could create an additional copy in your graveyard because she would duplicate the spell. But we don't know. But let's talk about what we do know. So this card is really important to the meta, in my opinion, because it functions as a vertical punishment, whereas cards like Lacerate and Marigold's Hailstorm serve as horizontal punishment for row stacking. And we've known that Lacerate and Marigold's Hailstorm, while they have dipped in popularity since the balancing patch that we received at the beginning of the month, they are still popular enough that you will see them. This is a card that punishes vertically, much like the Mahakam Pyrotechnician. So this card will always damage the highest unit. So unlike the Mahakam Pyrotechnician, it's more likely that you'll get full value for this card if there is a unit on each row on your opponent's side. What faction might make the best use of this card? It is a special bronze card, and you should probably have 3 of them if you really wanted to really maximize the value of this card. So that in itself is a restriction. Running 3 of a special card is not that common unless you're running stuff like Aretuza Adepts and Frost, or perhaps First Lights with Elven Mercenaries, perhaps in a hyper-thin Scoia'tael deck. So there is a restriction there in that you do need the space for this card in your deck. Northern Realms does have an option to run this card because it does have a card like Banard Tutor to ensure that all the copies will get drawn effectively, as well as you can using cards like Vest that allow you to mulligan additional cards so you can get all the copies of this card so you can really punish later on. However, Northern Realms, just like Nilfgaard, have very limited options when it comes to unit movement. So there's little that can be done to influence the opponent's board to execute big Crow's Eyes with consistency. So Crow's Eye doesn't do enough to reliably remove anything, and the card demands that you run multiple copies. So I think that Northern Realms, even though there is a card that would assist with this in the Banard Tutor, and Nilfgaard, which doesn't have a lot going for it as far as specials are concerned, and actually doesn't generally run a lot of special cards to begin with, I feel like they would be a little bit lacking in the control to reliably pull off big Crow's Eye. Skellige has the Harpooner, but the Harpooner is, the Whale Harpoon is, it's more so building up for a row stack. You want to pull things onto a row and you want to punish with cards like Herbalist and Lacerate, perhaps Marigold's Hailstorm, even Axeman in some decks. So you want to actually build the row stack for your opponent, so it's less likely that you would use the Harpooner to separate the row, and it's also less likely that you would do that because you would get less value from the Harpooner. So Skellige using this card is dependent on the kind of card it is, because if it is an organic card, Herbalists do have some application to help you thin your deck and play this card and play multiple copies of this card. So it's sort of counterintuitive with Skellige, since the Harpooner generally is trying to build a row, and this card encourages separation of rows. So it remains to be seen the quality that Skellige will get. Monsters, through weather, naturally encourage your opponent to actually separate the rows in which they play their units. And on top of that, they do have drowners. Unfortunately, monsters lack the tools to ensure that multiple copies of Crow's Eye get drawn. So to commit 3 bronze slots for monsters, it might be difficult. And I think that monsters have a lot of bronzes that do more and require less work. This one I might be incorrect about, but I do think that monsters probably... They do have application for this card, but I'm not sure if it makes the cut. But then again, the meta will be very different when this card comes in. We're going to see a lot of cards coming in that's going to change the way these decks will play. So we're reviewing this in a vacuum. But let's get to Scoia'tael. So this is where this card probably shines the brightest. Scoia'tael has access to the Dol Bluthana Trappers, and of course, playing Elven Mercenaries and Lacerates is not unheard of. So they have ways to punish you horizontally, and by showing that you can do the horizontal punishment, you may encourage your opponent to actually split the rows, and then you can start playing Crow's Eye. Additionally, they have movement cards like Dwarven Mercenary and Varied Brigade that can move your opponent's cards around, allowing you to get a lot of value, especially if you're using Elven Mercenary to pull out your Crow's Eye. So this allows you to thin, and it allows you to play all of your copies. So after showing Crow's Eye, your opponent might be hesitant to not row stack, and then you can punish them with Trapper or Lacerate, and vice versa. So this is kind of how the Mahakam Pyrotechnician already works, though. So I think that this card gives Scoia'tael some power and flexibility, but they already kind of have that with Pyrotechnician, so it's very strange. So since Scoia'tael already has access to Pyrotechnician, Dwarven Agitators, and ways to strengthen dwarves like the Pyrotechnician, as well as, and I'm talking about Dennis Cranmer, I'm not really sure if this card is going to be a leap in the power that Scoia'tael already has. The big thing about this card is that if this card turns out to be a spell, this is a great card for Ithleen. It creates 2 copies of the card in your graveyard, which allows you to get that extra 3rd copy in the graveyard to play your 4th Crow's Eye, which is a 21 damage bronze, should you have enough meat on your opponent's board to actually hit it. But since we don't know for sure, we don't know if this card is going to really shine in Scoia'tael or if it's just going to be another option outside of Pyrotechnician. Overall, in a vacuum, I would say this card is okay. I think that this card will see play in Scoia'tael, potentially with Elven Mercenaries, and I think that you would probably play stuff like Trapper to punish the vertical and the horizontal. I think that the other factions probably have better options, but there's more to this. We don't know what the patch is going to bring. This patch could bring all sorts of different things that make this card more viable, and that's worth keeping in mind. And should there be a draft mode, this card might just be a great card to draft. However, you would need to have 3 copies of this card, and without any sort of knowledge at all about any sort of future draft mode, we don't know how reliable this would actually be. So this is my very quick and somewhat incomplete review of Crow's Eye, not knowing what kind of special card it is. There is that extra little bit of evaluation that we can't apply. Also, not knowing the rest of the cards that would be available in this patch. There is that. We do know that it is a card that we know that Pyrotechnicians are very strong in Scoia'tael, and this functions similarly, so you can imagine that this card could see play. I personally think that it is okay, and because you need 3 of them to really make this card fantastic, it's possible that a lot of decks won't have room for it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you have some ideas that I wasn't able to think of, as I made this very hastily. So thanks for watching. Thanks for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed the reveal. Thanks, CD Projekt Red, for this opportunity. I'm off to Europe. Hope you enjoyed Gwent Slam this weekend. I'll see you there. Take care, folks.